want to make a correction, and also apologize to everyone who has watched me speak about Lilith before. Previously, I described Lilith mainly as a demon and as a figure of rebellion. After looking more deeply into her history, I realized that I mixed together several different traditions and periods. Lilith's history is far more complicated than simply saying Lilith is a demon. First, I want to correct something important. I cannot present it as a historical fact that Lilith was literally the oldest goddess, older than every other deity, or that historians have proven she was a goddess older than Yahweh or Baal. The historical evidence does not allow us to say that with certainty. What we can say is that Lilith has extremely ancient roots. Her name and mythology are commonly connected with ancient Mesopotamian traditions concerning beings such as the Lilith. These traditions existed long before the medieval story most people today associate with Lilith, the story about her being Adam's first wife. However, those ancient beings were generally understood as spirits or demonic beings, rather than proving the existence of one particular ancient goddess called Lilith. So I want to separate history from my own belief and interpretation. Historically, I cannot prove that Lilith was an ancient supreme goddess. Spiritually and symbolically, however, I personally choose to regard Lilith as something much greater than the word demon. Whether somebody calls her a spirit, demon, goddess, mythological being, symbol, or something else, I am not interested in degrading her simply because later traditions portrayed her negatively. To me, Lilith represents rebellion against domination, personal independence, equality, freedom, and the right to say no. And this brings me to the famous story about Lilith and Adam. Contrary to what people sometimes assume, the book of Genesis itself does not actually tell the familiar story that Lilith was Adam's first wife. That story developed much later, with its best-known version appearing in the medieval Jewish alphabet of Ben Sira. According to that legend, Lilith and Adam were both created from the earth. Adam attempted to establish authority over Lilith, including within their sexual relationship. Lilith rejected the idea that she was naturally inferior to him. Her argument was essentially that they had both been created from the same earth, and therefore she was his equal. And on that particular issue, I side with Lilith. I don't believe that being somebody's husband, wife, partner, boyfriend, or girlfriend gives you ownership over that person's body. Nobody owes another human being sexual submission because of gender. Nobody loses the right to say no because somebody else demands obedience. If Lilith says, I am your equal, then that is the part of the story that speaks most strongly to me. If Lilith refuses to submit, I don't automatically interpret rebellion as evil. Sometimes rebellion against tyranny is necessary. Sometimes saying no is the moral action. Sometimes refusing obedience is exactly what protects a person's dignity. That doesn't mean that every historical story about Lilith portrays her positively. Quite the opposite. Traditional Jewish folklore frequently portrays Lilith as dangerous, particularly in stories involving sexuality, pregnancy, childbirth, and infants. Later Jewish mystical traditions developed still more stories about her. Christianity also inherited and transformed some ideas surrounding Lilith and female demonic figures. Although Christianity does not have a canonical doctrine saying that Lilith was Adam's first wife, and modern people have interpreted her differently again. Some feminists and other modern writers have reclaimed Lilith as a symbol of female independence, precisely because she refuses Adam's authority. A character who earlier storytellers intended as frightening can therefore acquire an entirely different meaning to later generations. That transformation fascinates me, because I don't think we should automatically assume that whoever rebels in an old religious story must therefore represent evil. We should still ask, what were they rebelling against? If someone rebels against equality, justice, and compassion, I have no reason to celebrate that rebellion. But if someone rebels because another person tells them, you are beneath me, you must obey me because of what you are, then I understand the rebellion completely. That is where my interpretation of Lilith comes from. I also want to correct another mistake I previously made. It would not be historically accurate for me to take the medieval Adam and Lilith story and then reason that an ancient goddess older than Yahweh somehow married Adam. These These traditions developed at very different times. Ancient Mesopotamian Lilith-type beings, biblical traditions concerning Adam, later Jewish traditions concerning Lilith, medieval folklore about Lilith as Adam's first wife, and modern interpretations of Lilith should not simply be treated as one uninterrupted historical biography. They aren't. My own Lilith is therefore an interpretation. I can believe in or honor Lilith as a goddess without pretending that historians have proven every part of that belief. Faith, mythology, symbolism, and documented history aren't always the same thing, and I think it is better to be transparent about that. So when I speak about Lilith from now on, I don't want to reduce her to the succubus, the evil woman, or simply the demon. She is Lilith. People can disagree about what that name represents. Some may regard her as a demon. Some may regard her as a spirit. Some may regard her as mythology. Some modern believers may regard her as divine or as a goddess. Others may understand her primarily as a feminist symbol. For me, the important thing is what Lilith has come to represent: equality, independence, freedom, rebellion against tyranny, and the right to say no. That is also why I don't condemn Lilith for refusing Adam. If the story asks me to choose between somebody demanding superiority and somebody saying, we were created equally, therefore I will not be beneath you, then my sympathy is with the person demanding equality. I don't care whether that person is a man, woman, human, angel, demon, spirit, goddess, or anything else. Equality is equality. Consent is consent. Freedom is freedom. And rebellion against injustice does not automatically become evil, simply because authority calls the rebel disobedient. So I apologize for previously speaking about Lilith too simply, and for presenting uncertain mythology as though everything belonged to one established history. I still stand with the rebellious Lilith, but now I want to do so while respecting the difference between ancient history, Jewish folklore, later religious traditions, modern interpretations, and my own personal understanding of her. Whatever people choose to call Lilith, I will call her by her name, Lilith. And in my interpretation, she will remain a symbol of the person who had the courage to say, I am